Hello, everybody. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. Thank you for joining me today and making me a small part of your day. You know that I appreciate each and every one of you. I want to talk about some things, but that's the point of the show, is it not? This is radio. I can't mime the things, I guess, right? I'm trying to get rid of these cliches. I have a lot of cliches. They're not your typical cliches. They're cliches that I've made up over the course of doing this show that I realize, like, we've got a lot to talk about today. That's every day. This is a radio show. We pretty much exclusively deal in talking, right? So, yeah, I'm trying to kill those, trying to figure out another way to word things, but, man, it's habit. I just roll those out there without even thinking. I do appreciate you, though. That's never changed. But yeah, we got to talk about some things. The Big 12 is considering expanding, and in so doing, considering Memphis, which makes this story newsworthy, sort of. Like, that's one level of the newsworthiness of the story. And then the other level is, does a bigger Big 12, by adding 2 or 4 more teams, make itself out to be a bigger threat to the SEC? I'm a Big 12 guy, so this is pretty interesting. I have some conflicting emotions right now. We were talking earlier about Tennessee being the favorite to beat Alabama this year. I mean, who's got the best shot to beat Alabama while Alabama is searching to repeat for a title? And by the way, Alabama better stay number 1 in the nation until the second that they lose, because we gave Ohio State all kinds of leash last year while they were playing nobody and stepping over nothing from victory to victory. So I just want to make that clear. We gave Ohio State a long leash. So we'll see how that goes. But we've got the Vegas odds. If you want to bet who's got the best chance to beat the Crimson Tide, we've got the Vegas odds. And we used to do against the spread show every week in college football. I don't know if Mr. Judd would be interested in joining me for that every week, again, because of the lateness of this show. But I would like to have him on so we could go over this stuff, if not only because it was pretty fun last year. I am not a gambling degenerate. I don't have that bone necessarily in my body. I just like looking at the spread and like looking at how all of that stuff matches up with Vegas. If you can add more numbers to a thing, it makes me much, much happier. Just overcomplicate stuff with just numbers that nobody needs. That's the way to my heart right there. But Mr. Judd does like to roll the dice a little bit. So we'll see if you'll be interested in doing that this year, but we're going to take a look at the odds on that, as well as what it is that what's in a name, right? Shakespeare, Romeo and Juliet. The whole point of that story is like your name doesn't decide who you are. But in the NFL, we have some guys who are, according to CBS writer Pete Prisco, fairly overrated. So Pete Prisco put together an all overrated team. I think that he has lost his gourd on some of these names. He just looked at these names and went, oh, they didn't perform well last year. Obviously, they're overrated, which is weird because we won't give the credit to a guy who performs well on 1 year of greatness. But you could take everything away from a guy who has 1 down year. I find that all deeply, deeply fascinating, and we will get into all and any of that. But before we do, I'd like to tell you about where you can find us on the interwebs. Radio is not just a one-way street anymore. We talk to you, and you get to talk back. If you can find us on Facebook, Twitter, and YouTube, search Hot News Talk Radio, or go to hotnewstalkradio.com, and you'll find links to all of our social media, whether that's YouTube, where you can check out archived footage. We never call them old. Or that's Facebook, where you can stream our shows live. If you click on that little radio plugin and also check in the local reporting that we're doing, covering all of the things happening in the greater Chattanooga area, or whether that's Twitter, just to see the political opinions of the day. You can also check us out in the TuneIn Radio app. It's absolutely free in your favorite app store. Simply give us a favorite and press play, and you'll have Hot News Talk Radio everywhere you go. But I want to jump into this story about the Big 12 because it's very, very interesting. The Big 12 is considering expanding. Big 12 Media Days, which are the less exciting version of SEC Media Days because, like most of the Big 12 schools, yeah, who cares? You know, it's that you've got Oklahoma, you've got Texas, and I don't know, outside of the drama that those two schools bring, is anybody really picking apart Big 12 Media Days the way that you follow SEC Media Days? I mean, you don't, because like everyone in the SEC, especially the SEC West, let me say that more specifically. The SEC West feels like it's full of contenders. Some things break your way, and you're Texas A&M, you could win the West. You know, LSU could very easily win the West. You've got Alabama down there in Death Valley. You've got a chance. You've got the best chance, I think, of anybody in the West. So you've got a lot of contenders, it feels like, in the West. You could easily argue for 2, even 3 teams in the playoff. It's not going to happen because the committee's never going to allow a 2-loss SEC team or a 3-loss SEC team where there is possibly a 1-loss Pac-12 team. Like, that's just never going to happen. But you could argue that it should, just based on the depth in the conference, that 3 losses are not created equal. I mean, we just talked yesterday about how Arkansas is literally running through the entire SEC West 7 straight games with a run that includes in that LSU and Alabama. I mean, there's no way they come out of there clean, but you can't argue that they might not be good. They're just going to be playing a tougher schedule than most, as they usually do. So we're looking at the Big 12 Media Days. They don't have the depth, so it's not nearly as interesting. But this year's Big 12 Media Days are very, very interesting because they're talking about expanding the Big 12, which used to have 12 teams, ironically, now only has 10, and could have as many as 14. Really got to stop calling it the Big 12. You really got to just say, you know what, we're not going to bar ourselves to a number on this one, and just release the name. You're not 12. Your conference isn't that big, and you don't have 12 teams in it. But no, before I get off track, the point is the conference is considering expansion. Now, what does this mean for other conferences in college football? Because what this means on a number one level is the schools that are being considered to enter the Big 12 are BYU, South Florida, Memphis, Houston, East Carolina, and Cincinnati. And this is a great article written by Chris Wright at SaturdayDownSouth.com, which is a great college football blog. If you're not reading it, you should go ahead and do that. But basically, the Big 12, by not jumping in on it, trying to expand the conference when everybody else was expanding. Remember, we used to have the Pac-10. Pac-10 added 2 more teams to the Pac-12. The SEC brought in an A&M, brought in an Arkansas. By adding schools to the SEC and to the Pac-12, they expanded the conference, and they expanded the conference with very good schools. Okay? What the Big 12 failed to do was really bring in anybody noteworthy. Brought in TCU, and TCU has been incredible in the Big 12, but that's it, really. Like, TCU is the only addition that's been worth the while. You know, you got to imagine West Virginia is going to break out at some point just because Dana Holgerson's such a great coach, and his offenses are so dynamic that it's such a great fit for the Big 12, not geographically, but certainly in terms of play style, that if he gets the talent that he's looking for, there is absolutely no good reason why he can't run that conference for 3-4 year stretch, right? But when it comes to getting all the good teams, Big 12 didn't really do that. And now you're left with teams that are nice. BYU is nice. South Florida is nice. Memphis had a great season last year, but I mean, like the overall track record, they're just a nice school. Houston doesn't really play anybody that can defend them in their conference. They're nice. East Carolina, Cincinnati, nice schools, right? But nobody that's going to pack that punch. And if you're Memphis, are you banking on the fact that being in the Big 12 gives you an opportunity to recruit better and recruit more? Because you are going to get better talent by being in the Big 12. You can easily tell a recruit, look, you're in a bigger conference. This isn't just Conference USA anymore. There are going to be more eyeballs on you. There are going to be more scouts on you. More people are going to come in and watch you. But if someone's coming into the Big 12, a player, a prospect, they're more likely to go to Oklahoma, more likely to go to Texas, more likely to go to Texas Tech even, with Cliff Kingsbury, the coach up there, and more likely to go to any of those schools. Baylor, scandal aside, even Baylor, TCU, more likely to go to those schools than they are to go to Memphis. But how long does Memphis have to be in the conference before they're a staple enough that people just want to go to Memphis? Because you're going to get to recruit in Texas, and you're going to get to recruit in Oklahoma, and you're going to get to recruit in these states where, yeah, there's a lot of talent around you. And by being in Memphis, being in Tennessee, you're going to get to touch on some of this talent out here as well. So you're going to see some of the Big 12 bleeding in to the Deep South. That's the good news, I guess, for Memphis. The Big 12 doesn't really gain anything from this. Memphis has got a chance to try and parlay their good season last year into better season by simply being in a bigger conference. Big 12 doesn't gain anything from this except more members, which by having more members gives them the opportunity to have a championship game again, which is nice. But again, that's another thing that probably should have been addressed previously, because didn't Baylor and TCU both knock each other both out of the top four when the Big 12 couldn't decide which team was better and pronounced them Big 12 co-champions? That was in the first year of the playoff, and neither team got represented in the 4-team playoff. So the Big 12, nothing seemingly to gain there. But now, what does this mean for all the other conferences? If you're the SEC, is there anything to worry about with the Big 12 expanding? Because now you've got a big conference with more teams, and maybe not in the short term, but in the long term, presumably, if they're able to parlay being in a bigger conference with bringing in bigger names and bringing in bigger players, could they parlay that into something bigger? And if they parlay that into something bigger, does that not add more depth to the Big 12? Which in turn, does that not offer more challenges to the SEC? That when people are more likely to look at an SEC team and go, hey, they're an SEC school and they may have 2 losses, but look at those 2 losses. Those are 2 quality losses to 2 quality teams. We've been talking about it for years. Like, the one fear that people have had about the 4-team playoff was that the SEC might dominate this thing. Like, just on paper, the teams are better. The teams are better. Possibly not in the East this year, but down the road, can't imagine the Florida's not going to be great for very long, and that Georgia's going to be great as well. Right? So, I mean, the East is rising. Vanderbilt's improving. Kentucky headed in a positive direction, though they're not, going to be world beaters anytime soon. But the East is getting better. The West is already incredibly deep and incredibly dangerous. The reason why those fears about the SEC running the 4-team playoff ended up not being invalidated is because the SEC cannibalized itself, basically. There are teams that could have had maybe 1 loss in another conference. You play in the SEC West, unfortunately, you're catching 2, maybe 3 losses in a lot of instances. That's just how the cookie crumbles if you're there. So it turned out to not be true. But at the same time, a team like the Big 12, or a conference like the Big 12 with big popular names, big money-making names, if you're going to buy into any of the conspiracy talk, like Texas and Oklahoma, if you can add a little bit more depth there, some more exciting games with some quality opponents, and I mean this a few years down the road, not immediately, does that pose any kind of threat to the SEC making it to the playoffs? And I think that the short answer is Not really. Because how many years down the road do we have to wait for Memphis to be a really good team, or Cincinnati, or BYU? Now, BYU is interesting because BYU has some great games every now and then. Like, they'll just pop up and punch you in the face. But how many BYU games do we have to watch before BYU is consistently year in and year out a contender, or is that just never going to happen? And is the Big 12 just filling out the roster, essentially? Like, you have to have a certain amount of teams to look the part in modern college football. Is that what it is? Does the SEC ever have to worry about the Big 12 expanding, especially once the playoffs expand? And we do expect them to expand one day in the future, right? Because when you look at the playoff, and it's so lucrative, last year notwithstanding, because they decided to put the national, or the playing games for the national title game on New Year's, which I just thought was an awful idea. And I think everybody generally agrees that was an awful idea, that trying to force college football as a New Year's tradition really doesn't work out, because people don't stay home and watch college football on New Year's. Typically, you go out with family and friends. You either go over to somebody else's house, you either go out to some parties or something like that. I watched college football on New Year's, but people came over to my house, so I didn't have to move from the TV. You want to talk to me, you can talk to me and the TV. But generally, people go out on New Year's, and putting it the day after when people are home, possibly a little hungover, you can do that. That makes more sense. The most amount of eyeballs on the screen. But no, they had to force it and try and make it a New Year's tradition. But I don't think that the ratings are going to be as low as they were last year every single year. I think they're going to figure this thing out, and I think they're going to put it on the right time. I think either before New Year's or after. But if you expand the playoff to 6 teams, 8 teams, most of those teams are going to wind up being, I think, teams that can get away with one loss in their conference. So adding, and for lack of a better word, for adding fluff teams in your conference, teams that are never going to be the top dogs in your conference, at least not this decade. Your BYUs, your Memphises, your Cincinnatis, your South Floridas. If you're going to add those schools, who does it benefit? It benefits Baylor and TCU and Texas and Oklahoma, who have more teams that they can play, more conference games that they can play and win, and get away with maybe one loss against each other. Meanwhile, in the SEC West, you can't get out of there with just one loss unless you're Alabama or LSU. Just works out in their favor. Same thing for the Pac-12. You can get out with one loss if you have a good year and you're USC or you're Stanford or you're Oregon. You can get out because top to bottom, the bottom is much, much lower in your conference, and you have so many more teams at the bottom. Okay? Yeah, you don't have that in the SEC, especially not in the West. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. Just a quick note about things that make me mad. Movie remakes that don't need to happen. Movie sequels that don't need to happen are pretty bad already, but I'll take a sequel. I will. I mean, every now and then you can't take a sequel. Like Now You See Me 2 is, why would you ever do that to yourself and actually go see that? And B, what was so enjoyable about the first one that it needed a second one? Like that was a sequel that nobody asked for and we all got. And we're all the worse for it existing. Just a fact of life and of human existence. But I was watching one of the TVs in the studio, and they're making a remake of the movie Ben-Hur. And what I want to know is why? Why are you remaking a movie that classic and that great? In my mind, there will always only be one Ben-Hur. Just watch the original Ben-Hur. It's a great movie. Does it look a little bit dated? Yeah, I mean, old films tend to look a little bit dated, but like once you get into it, it's a great movie. We didn't need a second Ben-Hur. We didn't need it. I don't want it. I didn't ask for it. It's making me upset. So I had to tell you about it. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. That's me. Thank you for joining me today, making me just a small part of your day. Know that I appreciate you. Who's got the best chance to take out the Crimson Tide? The Vegas odds. Next.
I'm blowing everything up. We're starting over. I'm doing a new show. I want guys who push it to the middle of the table and go over the top. Take a risk, fail miserably. I'm right, and I'm not wrong, and I'll never back down. Conflict works. Allow it.
It's The Herd with Colin Cowherd. Right here and everywhere. Noon Eastern.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds. We'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240. You and I know that real men are prepared for anything. You know what I'm talking about because you're a Take Charge guy. Everyone's talking about Grimm's Tactical, featuring first responder gear, survival gear and equipment, Voodoo Tactical, Leapers. For personal protection, Grimm's Tactical features non-lethal personal protection gear, AR/AK parts, knives, canning and dehydrating equipment. If you hike and camp, Grimm's Tactical has got what you're looking for. Bags and packs. And for your side piece, concealed carry holsters. For men and women. Plus, Grimm's Tactical carries a wide variety of freeze-dried food. Wise Mountain House. Backpacker's Pantry. Grimm's Tactical, where law enforcement shops. Safari Lane. Blackhawk. 511. First responder gear at Grimm's Tactical. Grimm's Tactical, 8115 East Brainerd Road, in the shopping center next to the Walmart Marketplace. Look for the Mighty Mini U-Haul office. Grimm's Tactical is right next door. Grimm's Tactical, 8115 East Brainerd Road. Finding just the right place to live can be a daunting task. Stop your search. In Chattanooga, the place to live is Cross Creek Villas for under $1,000 and available for immediate move-in. You can enjoy this 2-bedroom split layout, over 1,000 square feet, 9-foot ceilings, an extra-large patio or balcony. And don't forget to ask about their preferred employer program. Cross Creek Villas is a gated community, offering a 24-hour fitness facility, a beautiful pool and hot tub, and Cross Creek Villas is pet-friendly. Stroll the pet park with your best friend and enjoy the free use of their business center and clubhouse. Plus, if you mention you heard this on the radio, your application fee is free. Cross Creek Villas, close to downtown off of Highway 58. Go to crosscreekchattanooga.com. That's crosscreekchattanooga.com or call 894-0446. That's 894-0446. Redefine the way you live at Cross Creek Villas. Go to crosscreekchattanooga.com or call 894-0446. Cross Creek Villas.
Fair skies will continue through the nighttime. Very muggy overnight, lows 72 to 75. For Thursday and Friday, the heat wave continues. Just a slight chance of a late afternoon storm. Otherwise, very hot and humid. High soaring into the upper 90s. That heat index through the afternoons, well over 100. Dr. Ron Phillips has released the most important book he's ever written, The Unraveling of America. He pulls back the curtain and exposes those who are pulling the strings and unraveling the fabric of America. Available at Amazon or ronphillips.org. And I'm Shoreen 12 Chief Meteorologist Patrick Hoare.
On AM 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds. We'll give you Chattanooga and the world.
Fox News Talk 1240. Hot 1240 Hot News Talk Radio with your Hot News Now update. A North Hamilton County Water Board Tuesday voted to abolish its fluoride injection program immediately. The Board of Northwest Utility District voted 6-1 to stop using the industrial waste product as a tooth enamel enhancer. Board members objected to fluoride's damage to equipment and want to err on the side of caution as regards to public health. Fluoride is said to reduce cavities, but is considered a developmental neurotoxin in a growing body of research literature. There's no mandate to put the fluoride in, said board member Jack Kane. After the SWAT standoff at the Bradley County Animal Clinic, the family of the suspect is now questioning police tactics. Family members claim that they were not allowed to negotiate with their family member who had holed himself up inside the Bradley County Animal Clinic. However, Sheriff Eric Watson defending his actions, saying that he was going to kill someone, kill himself, and if we was to come in, he was going to shoot us, said Bradley County Sheriff Eric Watson. The Appalachian Animal Clinic in Bradley County is going to be closed for a few days for cleanup and for emotional repair. How many Tennesseans are without broadband access?
Survey says 13%, according to the Department of Economic and Community Development. 13% of Tennesseans without broadband access. If it's going on in the Tennessee Valley, it's going on Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio.
Hot News Talk 1240.
So, who makes a perfect guinea pig? Who makes a perfect guinea pig? I posit that someone who makes a perfect guinea pig is somebody who doesn't have the power to stop you from making them a guinea pig, and possibly is a little too apathetic to really put up any resistance. And by that I mean, who do we test out this whole college football kickoff situation on? Just a question, because you got to test it out on somebody. You can't run that out there in the SEC at all. You like we can't go this season Tennessee versus Virginia Tech at Bristol on September 10th. We can't use that day to figure out what the kickoff situation ought to look like. Should we get rid of this or not? That's not the day. Okay, Tennessee trying to do something big with Bristol Motor Speedway and Virginia Tech. That's not the day to try and figure this out. LSU plays Alabama down in Death Valley. That's not the day to figure out whether or not we should have kickoffs in college football, but you got to try it somewhere. So the NCAA has approved the kickoff experiment for the Ivy Leagues. People with passionate enough academic fans, but no one who's going to put up an apathetic, or no one's going to be not too apathetic to fight back. They're gonna let this happen. Okay, Ivy League people don't care enough. They're going to let this happen. Just a fact. We're gonna try this. This is what we're going to try, according to Andrew Asselford of also Saturday Down South. This is what the experiment is. The NCAA Playing Rules Oversight Panel on Wednesday approved a rule that will allow the Ivy League to kick off from the 40-yard line in conference games only. As part of the experiment, touchbacks will move to the 20-yard line. Right now, kickoffs happen from the 35-yard line. And after touchbacks, a drive begins at the 25-yard line. So they're starting you from the 20 on touchbacks, and you're kicking from the 40 instead of the 35. So you've got enough of a momentum here when it comes to the rules and us trying to figure out if this is actually safer, if this is actually going to make players safer, or if this is going to actually reduce injuries for anybody. We're going to see if this actually works by watching the Ivy League. And I'm not going to lie. If this happens, I mean, I'm going to be a little bit more interested in Ivy League games. And make no mistake, I am not sitting down and watching Harvard play football. I have better things to do with my life, but I will check in and see a little bit of what that looks like. And I may even pay attention to some of those injury statistics as the season goes on. I wouldn't expect like regular people with lives to do that, but I would, just to see what happens. Right? I get that there is a little bit of trepidation when it comes to implementing some of these rules, because you want to see if this will work, if this will change the game. Because I think the general feeling is people think that this is going to make the game worse. And like I said yesterday, this is about the nature of the game versus player safety. People are okay with players being injured on some level if that's in the nature of the game. And if taking away kickoffs or drastically changing kickoffs are going to change the nature of the game, people don't want it. And they'll allow for the injuries. Like you just got to factor the injuries into playing football because that's part of the nature of the game. Not unlike boxing, not unlike having the possibility that you could be getting Tommy John surgery as a major league pitcher in baseball. Okay, you're throwing the ball as hard as Steven Strasburg throws it. You're going to get something happening with your elbow. You're going to pop that ligament. They're going to have to do Tommy John surgery. It's just inherent in what they're asking you to do, because in order to pitch the ball fast enough to get around most major league hitters nowadays, we saw what Giancarlo Stanton can do if he can get his bat on the ball in the home run derby, 61 home runs. I mean, like, the guy is just killing the ball. Nobody knocks the ball out of the park faster than him. You can't be throwing soft stuff past Giancarlo Stanton. It's just not going to work out very well for you. So we'll allow for the injuries if it's part of the nature of the game. We're totally cool with that. We are. And so this experiment in the Ivy Leagues, I think, is a great idea for two reasons. Because does it change the nature of the game? Of course it does. You're going to be kicking off from a closer distance, which means you're going to have more touchbacks. And then you're going to start the touchbacks from even further back. This is going to reduce scoring inherently. The extra 5 yards, you're playing, the great football cliche is you're playing a game of inches. It's going to reduce points. I don't know if this is what anybody wants to see. Why not have touchbacks result in starting further up? If kickoffs are where the injuries are happening, if you're telling me that most injuries are happening off of kickoffs, why move the ball back and lengthen the entire field? Why do that? You know what I mean? Like, why also punish the offense while you're eliminating special teams? It seems like a bizarre move. You're going to have less yardage. And also, if a team falls from behind, you're having trouble moving the ball up the field, starting from even further back, that's not going to help anything. And that's my worry about this whole Ivy League experiment, is that it's not going to give us a great view of what this is going to look like, if only because I don't expect, though I don't sit down and watch very much Ivy League football, I don't expect that these offenses are particularly adept at moving the ball up the field. And what you've done is you've lengthened the field. I mean, I expect to see points to plummet, to be quite honest with you. So we'll see how this experiment goes for the NCAA and the Ivy League. That's just something to keep an eye on as we move forward. One of my favorite sites for sports information is Reddit. It's a little foolhardy not to go there, because the original content that people create on Reddit is crazy. It's a little absurd and also very cool. So Reddit has, and you may agree or disagree with this list, Reddit has identified every SEC school's worst coach in program history. Okay, and we're just going to go down them. It starts with Alabama. It ends with Vanderbilt. It's alphabetical. Alabama's worst coach in history is Jennings Whitworth. Texas A&M is Hank Foldberg. Tennessee is Derek Dooley. I'm sure many of you agree with that. LSU's is Curly Hallman. Georgia is Johnny Griffith. Florida is Raymond Wolf. Missouri is Woody Widenhofer. Auburn is Earl Brown. Ole Miss is Ed Orgeron. Arkansas is Otis Douglas. South Carolina is Marvin Bass. Mississippi is Charles Shearer. And Kentucky is John Ray. And Vanderbilt is Rod Dowhauer. Now, what's interesting here is that the schools that were most recently considered to be pretty terrible, which is Vanderbilt and Tennessee. So the Tennessee schools, the pair of Tennessee schools in the SEC, and LSU even with Curly Hallman. Those teams have had horrible coaches in our lifetime. Now, what's interesting about Derek Dooley is, of all the terrible coaches, of all the schools, Derek Dooley has actually the best winning percentage of all the bad coaches, right? Which is, is like being the tallest person at you know what? There are a bunch of phrases for that, and none of those are appropriate. Not one of them. Not one of them. I was like, man, that is a lot of ground to step in. But no. Derek Dooley's got the best winning percentage of all the terrible coaches, which isn't saying much because it is a list of terrible coaches. But what I will say about this is the only terrible coach in the 2010s is Derek Dooley. Like, he was the most recent. He's the freshest in everybody's mind, and he is easily the worst. Like, the further back you go into Tennessee history, the better this gets. He is by far the worst. I don't think that anybody is even going to argue that. The Derek Dooley days were some dark, dark days for Tennessee, okay? And it's crazy because you followed Derek Dooley with Lane Kiffin, who did not do much besides run his mouth and lose football games, which is incredible. But the worst coach in the SEC, in SEC history, not just Tennessee history, SEC history, I think it's got to be Derek Dooley. Like, if you were making an anti-all-star team of coaches and players, the head coach, like an anti-all SEC team, would be coached by Derek Dooley, would it not? You could make a very, very strong case for Rod Dowhauer at Vanderbilt, who literally coached at Vanderbilt for one season and was 4-18. But part of it too was that his team wasn't very good, but neither was he. Like, he didn't elevate them past anything. They were just terrible. That is all. They were just ridiculously bad. They were just dreadful. And that's it. You could make a case for him, but for me, and for what it's worth, when you consider that Derek Dooley coached at Tennessee, had the history, had at least on some level the talent, and all that came with that, he was so bad. It seems like it would be that hard to be that bad with a school like that. So, the next time you're rabble-rousing about what it is that Butch Jones did that made you angry, and it's very possible that he could, because we'll see if he learned his lessons, his late-game lessons this season, before you start calling for his head, because we heard it last year. We did. When they lost to Florida, people were calling in they were so frustrated with Butch. Remember that you once were coached by Derek Dooley. Just hold that in your heart. I know you want to forget it. Don't. Hold that tight in your chest. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio Clutch with Keon Rose. That's me. Thank you for joining me today. Derek, two dismissed Georgia players reportedly headed to junior college. Okay, recently dismissed Georgia players Chad Clay and defensive lineman Chauncey Rivers are both expected to play for junior college programs this fall. According to Mark Weiser of the Athens Banner Herald, it's what he reported Wednesday. Clay will join Butler Community College in El Dorado, Kansas, and Rivers is added to East Mississippi Community College. So what that means is that we've got a couple of players headed out from Georgia who will, in a year or two, be playing for Auburn. Because that's what they do, right? Scoop up really good players that got dismissed from junior college. They have a history of doing it, okay? I mean, your one national title in recent memory came from you doing that. You did that. You got Cam Newton from junior college after he was dismissed from Florida. You got Cam. It's what you do. Don't be ashamed of it. Just own it. My point is that it's going to happen. That's where we're headed with all of this. So now, who's got the best odds to unseat Alabama in 2016? Well, the favorites of the SEC are Alabama. The other top contenders of it are LSU, Tennessee, and then you've got your long shot, A&M. Okay, now here are the odds, right? Alabama is plus 180. They're plus 180. Those are the odds of Alabama winning the SEC. Tennessee and LSU are tied at 400. 400 to 1 odds of winning the SEC. So Vegas thinks that LSU and Tennessee have about the same chances of taking out Alabama, which makes sense because, one, LSU has a really good team, really could run the table, and they've got their one home game or their one game against Alabama at home, right? And then you've got Tennessee, who gets to take 2 cracks at Alabama. And depending on which Alabama team they beat, they have a chance to not just win the SEC, but remove Alabama from the playoff. Depending on whether or not they beat Alabama earlier or later in the season. You've got that opportunity. I mean, Tennessee has got an easier schedule, an easier path playing in the East, and then you get 2 cracks at Bama. Presumably. All things go correctly. Now, Tennessee, you say that they've got a more favorable schedule, but they've got a decently tough stretch in the middle of the season. They have 4 teams that they play in a row that makes life a little bit difficult for them. This is the teams that they play in a row are, hold on, because everybody's got their stretches of this in the season. Let's see. They play, their stretch of games is this right here. Starting September 24th, they play the Gators at home, Neyland Stadium. Then they go to Georgia, play the Bulldogs in Athens. Then they head to Kyle Field and take on the Texas A&M Aggies. And then they're back home in Neyland Stadium to play Alabama. So in this stretch of 4 games, Tennessee can't lose. If they're going to win the SEC, Tennessee has to beat Florida. They have to beat Georgia, and they have to beat A&M. And by the way, A&M is going to be really good this year. I think so. I mean, I saw Trevor Knight play at Oklahoma last year, watched a few games with him. He wasn't really clicking in Oklahoma's offense, but that being said, he was a talented player. And I think that the Aggies are more quarterback intensive than Oklahoma is, just a little bit. So he's probably a better fit for them. I mean, Tennessee can't slip up on any of those games. The only game that they're allowed to lose is the Alabama game at the end. And if they run the table the rest of the way in the SEC championship game in Atlanta, Georgia, in the Georgia Dome, they're going to have to beat Alabama, most likely, to win the SEC. Provided that Alabama handles all its business and doesn't lose to LSU, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So, I mean, I think that that's a pretty good description of those odds that Tennessee's got to try and win this conference. And LSU's got an equally good chance to win the league because of that favorable matchup with Alabama at home, with LSU's schedule being fairly backloaded, if I recall correctly, right? The LSU schedule comes out to, they have a bye, and then they play Alabama, followed by Arkansas. Get a nice, wonderful game from South Alabama, the Jaguars there, and then they end the season with Texas A&M. So their games are pretty sprinkled throughout, and they don't have the toughest schedule. This is what makes this very likely for LSU. It's not a cakewalk. Okay, you play Wisconsin on a neutral location. You play Mississippi State at home. You play Missouri at home. You play Florida on the road. You play Ole Miss at home. So you play a decent amount of games at home. And then you also get Alabama at home. I mean, this is a good opportunity here for LSU. A golden opportunity for LSU. Plus, you've got Leonard Fournette. The only question here is, I think, for LSU, you kind of have to go as far as Brandon Harris can take you. He did show some improvement last year, but I want to see the consistency out of that guy before I pick LSU. Like, I really like them. He's the reason why. You know, and the fact that he didn't go to SEC media days, by the way, he wasn't brought along with the team, it tells you a little bit about what the coach thinks about players on the team. You know, the quarterback is the most important position on the field, and Les Miles didn't bring Brandon Harris. What does that tell you? That we might not trust Brandon Harris again. And sure, the only thing that we have to really go on recently is the spring game, and the spring game didn't look good. And I understand that that's just the spring game. Like, that's not real football. It's I got it. But like, really, he didn't look good. So I don't really trust it, but LSU's got a good shot. They play an easy enough schedule, and all of the tough teams they really have to play, they play at home. I mean, this is perfect. If you're LSU, you strike while the iron is hot. If you're Tennessee, you've got a tough schedule. You do. Because let's go down the rough patch of that schedule again. You've got Florida, you've got Georgia, you've got A&M, you've got Bama. And you only play Florida and Bama at home. You're on the road for Georgia, and you're on the road for A&M. The two teams that are very, very capable of beating you. Like, once you beat them, I don't want to say you're home free, but the rest of your schedule is a bye week, the Gamecocks, Tennessee Tech, Kentucky, Missouri, and Vanderbilt. So getting through that 4-game stretch after you play Ohio, because you got App State week 1, Virginia Tech, the Bristol Motor Speedway game, and then the Ohio Bobcats. If you can get through those first 3 games unscathed, you've got 4 in a row that could just ruin your season. And really, the only one you're allowed to lose is Alabama. You can't lose to any of the other teams. And if you do, then you have to beat Alabama. And why would you put that pressure on yourself? That seems a little ridiculous to me, to put that level of pressure on yourself where you have to beat Alabama. Handle your business against Florida. You're definitely better than them. It's hard to say exactly how good Georgia will be. Kirby Smart has been overly critical of the team, but I don't know what that means. Is that just his personality where he's critical, or is the team really not as good as he would like them to be? And then you've got Texas A&M, that they're a dark horse for a reason. We don't know what their full potential is yet, but they could possibly achieve it. And then you got to roll up against the Crimson Tide and handle business there as well. It's going to be tough. But Tennessee and LSU have the best odds to take Alabama down this year, according to Vegas. And quite frankly, I agree. You're listening to Hot 1240, Hot News Talk Radio, Clutch with Keon Rose. It's not how you start, it's how you finish. I'll see you in 24 hours. Free Talk Live up next.
You give us 12 minutes and 40 seconds, we'll give you Chattanooga and the world.